Hi, welcome back, and thank you for staying with us right here on Bernama World. Now, as nations from France to Australia enforce hard bans on social media for minors, we here in Malaysia are stepping up with our own mandate, a minimum age of 16 to access the world's biggest platforms. But in a world of borderless connectivity and savvy workarounds, can legislation truly outpace the algorithm? That's a question we are asking ourselves at this point, or as a nation. These are the questions or conversations that we're having. Joining us now is MEDIHA MAHMOOD. She is the CEO of the Communications and Multimedia Content Forum of Malaysia. We hope to get her insights. MEDIHA, thank you so much for taking time off your busy schedule and for doing this for us. Now, I'd like to begin here with nations like France and Australia moving toward hard bans. Is this an admission that voluntary industry guidelines like the content code are no longer enough to keep big tech in check?
That actually presumes that we ever had the big tech in check or part of self-regulation. The fact of the matter is, social media platforms do not self-regulate the way traditional content players do. For example, in Malaysia, traditional media players have long accepted self-regulation and voluntary guidelines as part of operating responsibly under the Communications and Multimedia Act. But platform participation has been more uneven because at present, only TikTok and Bigo have joined the Content Forum as members, being part of self-regulation. So I would say that hard bans here is signaling more of frustration rather than failure. I see it as the government saying, we need to draw a clear line for children now. And what self-regulation does is everything around that line. Because laws can stay stopped, but codes and industry standards, that's what shapes how platforms behave today, how they design features, how complaints are handled. And I do believe that in the digital environment now, which changes every few months, that flexibility of self-regulation is actually more valuable rather than less.
Now, online safety, or the Online Safety Act, better known as ONSA, Malaysia is testing age verification. How do we implement this technically without creating a surveillance state for, say, ordinary citizens?
Now, this is a very valid concern, and I've been hearing it, or we've been hearing it from so many stakeholders. And it's also one that the government is also very much clearly aware of. So age assurance or age verification does not really have to mean identity tracking like some people are worried it would mean. It just needs a simple yes or no question. Is this user old enough? Now, it's like the bouncer at the entrance of a nightclub and how they card you before you can go in. They don't take your ID. They don't take a photo of your ID. They don't keep it in file somewhere. They just look at it to confirm that you're of age. So sometimes they don't even need to card you because everything about you screams that you're not a teenager. So similarly here, what's happening is that the platforms and MCMC are conducting a regulatory sandbox to determine what's the most practical approach, which I feel would be privacy by design. Minimal data, no central databases, no reuse of information or tools or ads for profiling. So these are the concerns that are being highlighted, and we need to establish clear boundaries on what platforms can and cannot do with age data.
Now, I mean, with what you've said, we need to also understand at this juncture that kids are tech savvy, they use VPNs and also fake birthdays. Now, if we implement a minimum age of 16 by July, how does the government plan to address the cat and mouse game of children migrating to, let's say, even more dangerous, unmonitored platforms?
This, again, is a very valid concern. I have 2 teenagers of my own. They will get around it. They know exactly how to do it. We need to be very honest about that. But I'm not going to give you the whole spiel about, how alcohol and cigarettes had the same thing, but it actually just did. When they were first launched into the market, there were no age restrictions. Kids could buy them for their parents or for themselves. But eventually the prohibitions came in and the signal was clear. Similarly here, a ban isn't only about trying to catch everyone. That's really rather impossible. But catch enough people, that's one thing. But what is more important is the signal. The social media ban, what it does, it signals to parents for younger children. It sends a very clear message. Social media harms are real. They're as real as harms of cigarette and alcohol to kids. And this is something that parents should know that they shouldn't be rushing into. So even if, like you said, a 15-year-old finds a workaround, the broader signal still matters, that it shapes expectations, it delays exposure, And it gives parents the confidence to say no. And I think that value often gets overlooked. But on how to make sure that our kids do not migrate to even more dangerous unmonitored platforms, that's really up to us as well, as parents, as guardians. And hopefully, if more platforms understand the need for safety by design, the need to make sure what's offered out there is designed by default to be safe for kids, then we shouldn't be too worried about it.
Now, President Macron says, or earlier this week said, children's brains are not for sale to algorithms. Now, so beyond banning access, what is Malaysia actually doing, or what are we actually doing as a nation to make platforms safer for children at this point, as we speak now?
I love this angle. It's really the more important question, really, because unlike traditional media that only pushes content to you, with social media and digital platforms, harm doesn't only come from the bad content. It comes from the design and the scrolling, comparison culture, or FOMO, or autoplay, and these are all choices that platforms are making. So in order for us to make sure that these platforms, or I wouldn't want to say force, but it's come to that, I think, to change these things, we are implementing it through ONSA. We're implementing it through MCMC, deeming all of these platforms as licensees, therefore being subject to all the laws out there. Through codes and guidelines as well, regulators can push platforms to slow things down, especially for minors. For example, compelling that they add breaks or friction, reducing amplification, make sure that algorithms don't push things to children the way they push it to adults. All these small changes can be affected through licensing or legislation. These small changes can have really big effects, and that's what the ONSA is actually meant to do as well.
Right. Now, if the government steps in with bans, is there a risk that parents become less alert? And how do we make sure the laws support, not replace, good parenting and media awareness at home? And this goes back to that same question about sending your kids for martial arts, leaving them in a taekwondo, aikido or judo school and saying, teach my kids how to take care of themselves, without the parents being in the know of how they're learning how to take care of themselves.
I love that analogy. In fact, that's very, very clear. If you have these kind of bans and it's being lauded everywhere, parents might think, okay, the government has handled it, and just switch off. Similar to what you just said about martial arts, it's just like going to a hotel with your family and there's a really super deep pool with a whirlpool or a waterfall, and then it's surrounded by signs that says children are not allowed. But parents can't just rely on those signs to keep their kids safe. There has to be surveillance. There has to be vigilance on the parent side as well. So similarly for this, regulation should support parents, not replace them. I think YB Fahmi has mentioned it so many times. Peranti bukan pengasuh. It's not supposed to replace parents. So media literacy, conversations about media literacy and online safety that begins at home should include also how platforms work. These conversations remain crucial. And this is a large part of the advocacy work that the government is doing through MCMC, and also what we do at the Content Forum. We want to help translate these policies into practical guidance for parents so that they can actually relate to it. And at least it's easier for them to put it into use rather than legal language that feels far removed from daily life. So hopefully with more of us having these conversations about what is at risk to the children, then parents also realize that we can't just rely on laws for this.
Now, at what point, and I'd like to before we sign out, I'd like to ask you this one last question. At what point does protecting minors from exploitation start to hinder Malaysia's goals, say for a digital economy, where early digital fluency is often seen as competitive advantage? And we're talking about this just after the show. We're going to be talking about that again on The Nation.
Right. So protecting minors from exploitation, whether or not it hinders Malaysia's goals for a digital economy, I don't think so. I believe that a digital economy that's built on harms or distrust really isn't sustainable. And we all have to admit, everyone, parents, educators, investors, we all want safe, credible environments. So early digital fluency shouldn't necessarily mean unlimited access at such a young age. It should mean learning how to use technology responsibly and safely. And I think we're all here to strike that balance, allowing innovation to continue while setting shared expectations on responsibility. And I do believe that trust is essentially what ultimately supports growth, including the growth of the digital economy.
MEDIHA, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to have you in the studios to walk us through all of the simple things we can do to make things better. And that's a little conversation we'll have outside the studio. MEDIHA MAHMOOD, CEO of the Communications and Multimedia Content Forum of Malaysia. Thanks again, MEDIHA. We'll be back with more updates shortly. Stay with us right here on The World. Bernama TV are coming up with a little bit more on what's happening around the world. I'm GERARD. Thank you very much once again for staying with us.